Disney's The Wild. Anyone remember? Take your time. The Wild is one of various childhood movies I grew up watching, quickly forgot about, and never properly revisited. And for years, the only thing I could vaguely recall was how strangely similar it was to DreamWorks' Madagascar, a comparison that is often made whenever it gets brought up. And as controversial as may sound, I've always found Madagascar to be the superior film, and it's not even close. I also apologize in advance for mentioning Madagascar a lot. It's practically impossible to discuss The Wild without at least mentioning that film once, which is what I'll be doing, so expect a lot of that going forward. So yeah, The Wild. It exists. I'm not sure how to describe it though. The Wild is a 2006 computer animated film directed by Now in contrast to what the back of this box says, The Wild is not an official Disney classic, at least in the US. The main animation studio had zero involvement with the film's production, with the only reason for it being counted as a classic likely being due to Disney themselves distributing it, and for some unknown reason it manages to sneak in while Dinosaur and Winnie the Pooh are omitted in the UK. Instead, the movie was produced at several different companies with the help of Core Feature Animation, a seemingly obscure studio who helped animate the film. To this day, The Wild is their only feature-length project they've worked on, with the company later ceasing operations in 2010. The movie itself was universally panned on release, as well as failing to make back its $80 million budget, grossing just over $100 million worldwide, and unsurprisingly, the movie quickly faded into complete obscurity, with those who grew up watching being confused upon rediscovering this lost childhood fever dream, which is more or less how most of us view this film. It feels like a fucking acid trip. You could even say it's Madagascar on steroids. The movie is so bizarre, and that honestly makes it hard to accurately summarize my overall feelings on this forgotten childhood memory. But on the other hand, it's kind of interesting to talk about. This was released during Disney's weird phase. Like many others, I refuse to call this era the Disney Dark Age, because a lot of these movies were decently popular with audiences, and not all of them were downright terrible as some will have you believe. In my opinion, this era of Disney is one of my favourites to look into. So many strange and unique films were being made, and as you can tell, I find them really interesting to research and collect. It's been a good while since I've taken a look at these odd releases, and with that, I think it's time to dedicate an entire episode to The Wild. It's an idea I've had for several months, and now that I see an opening, I'll gladly take it. The Wild follows a group of animal friends living in the New York City Zoo, with the main focus being Samson and his son Ryan. After a contrived argument, Ryan runs off and hides in a green shipping container, which unsurprisingly gets him taken away. With Ryan gone, Samson initiates a rescue mission with his friends, and soon after, they end up in the wild. Alright, that's fair. As you can tell, the movie's plot is very similar to a particular DreamWorks film I've already mentioned various times and will refuse to bring up again until much later, though there is something I want to mention that's different about the two. In Madagascar, they're shipped off to the wild by complete accident. They had zero intention in even getting to the island because they initially left the zoo to find Marty, who was still lingering in New York as opposed to being taken away against his will. And even then, Ryan is shipped off by accident without the knowledge of any humans. In Madagascar, they are intentionally shipped off to Africa, or so they thought, with the knowledge of humans. And on top of that, they don't even return home. Until the third movie, that is. The plot has also been criticized for being highly derivative of other works and supposedly recycling plot points and themes from Finding Nemo. How do you even get to that conclusion? Yeah, they have a similar premise involving one's offspring running away and getting lost, with the parent having to go and rescue them. The reason I take issue with this claim, however, is because a lot of movies before The Wild have already done this trope, and for whatever reason, Finding Nemo is the one that gets picked. But putting aside this questionable comparison, it still doesn't change anything about the movie, because as expected, it's quite a mess. To begin, the opening 20 minutes feel surprisingly mean. Example: this happens multiple times, by the way, after a great start, but before we get to that, let's first discuss the opening sequence. Right off the bat, the art direction here is a lot different to the rest of the film. It's very stylized and provides unique visuals to grab your attention. That's cool, I guess. Animation aside, the sequence itself is just Samson tell his son Ryan the true story of how he once defeated a large group of wildebeest. I smell bullshit. Also, aren't wildebeests considered docile? I'm not an expert when it comes to animal life, but last time I checked, wildebeests are generally preyed on by carnivores, including lions. So in that case, why are they charging towards him? What is even going on here anyway? But whatever, it's a mid-2000s Disney film as you can clearly tell, as the chosen art style for the feature is an obvious attempt at realism, something almost unheard of at the time for a tool as recent as CGI. And much like Dinosaur, The Wild is visually impressive, but here's the problem, it looks too good. And I know that sounds stupid, but hear me out. When an animated movie presents itself as realistic, it can easily come off as uncanny and creepy. And that's not to say I felt scared watching, because why the hell would I? What I mean is the film tries to be cartoony by giving their characters very animated facial expressions and body movements, while simultaneously being so impressively detailed that they look very close to the animals they are based on. And when it comes to most people, you'll know that this animation style is unlikely to appeal to a wide audience. Not only can this turn some people off, but it can also often clash with the cartoony style they're trying to go for, resulting in a somewhat incoherent experience. But either way, we're soon properly introduced to our main protagonists. You know the names. After hearing countless stories of his dad's adventures in the wild, Ryan looks up to Samson and wishes to be just like him. But unfortunately, he lacks the ability to roar like a lion, and attempting to do so often leads to humiliation. Because of this, he wishes he could go to the wild in hopes of learning how to roar and become like his dad. But unsurprisingly, Samson disapproves of this idea, which makes sense. Oh, and by the way, have any of you noticed something about Ryan's voice?
I'm never gonna learn how to roar here, Dad. Try not to be jealous.
I'll just let the video clips speak for themselves. We're then introduced to Benny, a squirrel who wants to fuck the giraffe. Why? I don't know. I hate to bring it up again, but Madagascar didn't feature any romance between its characters, specifically Melman and Gloria, and yet I'm still being reminded of them. Just a heads up by the way, if you don't like Benny the moment he's introduced, then sit tight because he's a prominent character, and most of his scenes consist of him obnoxiously trying to rizz up the woman of his dreams. And spoilers, she doesn't like him. Now about the giraffe character, her name is Bridget and she's certainly one of the characters ever. She doesn't really do anything meaningful or interesting, and that honestly makes it difficult to describe her, as she rarely ever contributes to the plot aside from being a simple cog in Benny's story arc. Oh yeah, I should mention, Benny goes for a mini character arc involving him and his lame attempts to impress Bridget, while also realizing that she is her own individual with her own choices to make. First off, his character arc concludes literally out of nowhere, and second, Bridget takes this as a sign to finally accept him as boyfriend number one. Why? They spend the entire journey bickering and arguing with each other like most romantic couples, and never do anything that even closely resembles a healthy romantic interaction. So what exactly is the point here? All I know is they'll make a terrible couple. The other main characters introduced include Larry the Anaconda and Nigel the Koala. Larry is the typical dumbass member of the group because... never mind, he's just stupid.
Guess what? We're gonna use the secret plan!
Bro trying to be Ralph Wiggum. Nigel, on the other hand, is a goofy koala who for no reason at all speaks with a British accent as opposed to an Australian one, but that's likely due to the VA being English herself, which makes sense. But good luck convincing me this koala is native to the streets of London, because last time I checked, they're exclusively native to southern Australia.
I'm a vicious jungle animal from the streets of London!
Stop the cap!
Nigel is pretty akin to the likes of Wilbur and Socks, where such characters become the best and most memorable aspects to the film. In the Wild's case, it's no different. Nigel is easily the greatest thing about this movie, and I'm sure less than 5% of the population agrees. The reason he's my favourite is to do with how he stands out among the cast with his odd dialogue and delivery of jokes. It's a bit difficult to explain what exactly makes him so funny, since humour is generally subjective, but again, this is my opinion, so regardless of what I say and think, not everyone is going to agree 100%, so once again, I'll let the clips speak for themselves.
I'm gonna throw up! I'm gonna throw up! I'm gonna throw up! Alright. It is cheating and you will die! He's taunting us! Listen!
Now going back to the opening, it's honestly not a bad setup. It introduces the inhabitants and showcases what a usual night at the zoo tends to be, and for this night in particular we're told of a special game being held involving Samson and his friends being pitted against a team of penguins, and yikes does this scene have some serious issues. Firstly, it's incredibly mean-spirited, and yes, I'm aware this stuff is already present beforehand, I even mentioned it myself. What I'm saying is that here it's almost non-stop.
It's a shame your little brat isn't here to see you lose.
Being forced to watch Samson and his team be constantly ridiculed and bullied doesn't feel great, especially as it happens for reasons we don't know. And secondly, the fallout between Samson and Ryan is just really forced. It makes zero sense for Ryan to even wish that Samson was never his dad, because unlike Marlin, who was extremely obsessive and overprotective of his son, Samson doesn't appear to have shown any toxic parenting traits, aside from maybe lying about being from the wild. And from what we see, Ryan is lucky to even have a considerate father who actually cares and tries to help out as much as possible. So in other words, it's completely unprovoked. And if anyone was to argue on how Samson was in the wrong, I'll have you know that he immediately regrets what he said on the spot. Hell, we see him afterwards talking to Benny about the situation while Ryan steps inside a green shipping container, which results in him being separated from his dad, even though he was told to specifically avoid them.
Those boxes are bad news. Stay away.
From this point on, the main story finally gets going, with Samson and Benny tracking down Hamiir for information, and his introduction has got to be one of the weirdest, most bizarre things I've had to sit through in all of media. He's more of a plot device than an actual character, for this is the only scene he makes an appearance in, but my god does he look gross. And the woman too, why do they look like that? There's so many things wrong with this scene, and thankfully enough it only lasts a quick minute. I don't want to see big titty pigeon ladies, thank you very much. The rest of Act 1 consists of Samson and his friends traversing through the city, and for whatever reason nobody appears to notice a giraffe, lion, koala and snake being chased down by a group of vicious dogs. Also, best line of dialogue conceived by man. With that said, we absolutely cannot overlook the wonderful world of product placement, and to be fair, it makes for an accurate depiction of Times Square. And no, I've never been to New York myself, but you should still trust me.
Hey, look!
A better movie. In case you thought this movie couldn't get any weirder, I don't even know what to say. Alligators in Manhattan. There are no alligators in Manhattan. And like Hamiir, they're just plot devices that move the story along, rather than actual characters of their own. The idea of crocodiles? Really? The idea of alligators lurking beneath the city already sounds ridiculous enough, and to my genuine shock, it's a real urban legend. For decades, rumors and stories involving sewer alligators had been passed around, with countless investigations taking place in attempts to confirm the various sightings, and as you'd expect, a lot of these stories were deemed false. The feasibility of an alligator living in the sewer is just not there, as the chances of long-term survival are incredibly low due to the abundance of dangerous bacteria and low temperatures. That was something I didn't know before.
He never got over being flushed down the toilet.
So then the alligators lead them to... and wacky shenanigans soon follow as Samson and friends comically struggle to steer a boat. I should also probably mention the weird obsession this movie has with these randomly inserted close-ups. Like, what's the deal? They feel uncomfortable to look at, and speaking of uncomfortable, Benny makes his triumphant return after a blissful 10-minute absence, and I'm already missing it.
Bridget was very concerned when you fell off the truck.
Being worried for one's safety does not equal romance, but alright. Also, how the fuck? Didn't they explicitly say the boat was nowhere to be found?
He seemed to have lost Ryan's boat.
What, nothing?
Nothing.
Because if so, how did they miss that easily? It's literally to their right. Might as well book an appointment at this rate.
Guys, look.
Now here's the part I completely forgot about. Prior to my first rewatch, I could never recall anything after this. It's also the part where the main characters split up. Couldn't see that coming. Okay, to clear things up, I'm not complaining. If anything, I applaud them for not making the characters argue for completely arbitrary reasons. But again, if you've seen the film, you're probably aware of the liar revealed thing they try to pull off, and it's barely surprising. You can already tell from the start the Samson story is 100% made up, and yeah, that was probably the intention, but on the assumption that it wasn't, it makes for a weak plot twist. But to give credit where it's due, their attempt at one isn't terrible, as throughout the film they sprinkle in a few clues building up to the twist, plus it actually impacts the story in a way that doesn't feel forced or out of place, and while that doesn't change my overall opinion, there is at least an attempt. We also learn the presence of an active volcano, which further explains this. I'll admit, that's not a bad way of raising the stakes. It kinda makes you root for Samson a lot more. All he wants to do is bring his son home, and I just can't blame him for it. He's a much better father than I expected going in, especially compared to you-know-who. Hey, remember the Wildebeest from the opening sequence? Well, they're back, and this time, they're having a really nice day.
Strange place for a party.
To get you to speed, Nigel gets taken to a wildebeest gathering inside a volcano, led by an individual named Kazaa, voiced by William Shatner of all people, who believes Nigel to be the great him. He's the main villain of the film, and his overall plan is to transform him and the other wildebeests into vegetarians. Yeah, vegetarians. That's the plan. Their method of worship is a really bizarre but welcoming choice. Really Nice Day is nowhere near the levels of One Little Slip, but it's still a nice tune on its own, and I like the addition of the phrase that you can hear in the song. And speaking of the doll, it gets reintroduced along with a backstory explaining all of this, and I must say, this movie is living up to the name.
I lost count for one verse.
Meanwhile, Samson rescues Ryan from an ambush and is finally reunited with his son, for about 5 minutes. Alright, I get it, he can't roar. Anyways, remember when Samson revealed to his friends that he wasn't from the wild? Well, about that, we get another backstory, this time detailing his childhood and his terrible relationship with his terrible excuse of a father, who was actually voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, or in other words, Kamek from the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I really hate this guy, and seeing that it was likely intended, they certainly did a good job. It also explains why Samson is a decent parental figure who just wants the best for his son, without overstepping his boundaries or even doubting his ability to roar, which leads us into the third act, where Ryan is captured and believes Samson to be dead after being attacked by a group of wildebeests. And then there's German dung beetles. What significance do they have to the plot? They show up for 1 minute and leave immediately after. Never again do we see these dung beetle characters. They are in no way integral to the plot and are likely just there as an excuse to insert haha funny poo-poo jokes. But regardless, Benny finds Samson and they meet a pair of chameleons who believe they're cover agents. They're the worst cover agents I've ever seen. With their help, Samson and Benny break inside, and almost immediately we get an intense showdown between Samson and Kazaa. Another reason why this guy is an underrated Disney parent, and if you're still not 100% convinced, then I don't know what to tell you.
Shut up, Larry. That's stupid.
Nice sympathy bait. I appreciate the return of the secret play here. What started as seemingly pointless later becomes integral to the final conflict. This is something not even Chicken Little could do. I hate to go off topic, but in Chicken Little, the first half involved the titular character playing baseball, and the best part is how they never bring it up again, not even as a way to fight off the aliens. All we get is a brief mention during his confrontation with Buck, and that's it.
You were there when I won the big game.
Either way, Samson defeats Kazaa in the goofiest way possible, and following that, we get the classic villain death, my favorite Disney trope. But uh-oh, the volcano is about to erupt and they're still inside. But not to worry, they make it out alive somehow. I highly doubt there was enough time for everyone to make it out though. Yes, even the wildebeests. They suddenly ditched their leader after watching Samson and Ryan have a father-son moment, and that apparently convinced them to snap out of their delusions. Okay. This movie also has a dance party ending because it isn't a mid-2000s animated film without one, and to be honest, it could have been worse. Nigel does the fuck shaker, Samson hits the griddy, Larry is now a secret agent apparently, and they all lived happily ever after. The end. What the hell did I just watch? The Wild is an interesting film to think about. It's obviously not very good and houses a ton of problems ranging from an inconsistent tone, unnecessary close-up shots, hit-or-miss jokes, pointless characters, questionable creative decisions, and so on. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it, because admittedly, I had a fun time revisiting, and on top of that, there are genuine qualities to the film that I personally appreciate, such as the music. The movie's score was a lot better than I expected, being composed by the same guy who did the score for Lilo and Stitch, which is really cool, and the licensed music isn't too bad either. Yeah, some of the choices are pretty odd, such as Real Wild Child and Loving You, but you also have Big Time Boppin', Real Nice Day, and Good Enough, which are all decent tracks in my opinion. The animation isn't the best and can look pretty ugly at times, but on a technical level, it's undeniably impressive. And then you have Nigel, who's honestly the best character we have. I don't know what it is that makes him so funny and entertaining for me, but he works well enough. If I was to guess, it would probably be the delivery of his jokes, as well as Eddie Izzard's vocal performance throughout the feature. So overall, I like this movie. Yeah, it's flawed and dumb and stupid and bad, and a blatant copy of Madagascar apparently, but to be honest, I really don't care. This movie's fun. It's not good, and it doesn't have to be, as my personal criteria for a film involves being rewatchable and fun. I completely get why many dislike it, and almost every critique against The Wild is perfectly valid, but I don't know, I just like dumb movies. I beg of you people to leave me alone during my 750th rewatch of cinema's finest production since Citizen Kane. And then there's Madagascar. I think it's time that I mention this movie again. The controversy surrounding The Wild involves Disney allegedly ripping off DreamWorks by releasing a similar feature just 1 year after Madagascar, and by the looks of it, I honestly cannot tell who had the idea first. A lot of film companies are very secretive on what goes on behind closed doors, and only a select amount of information on the development of their projects get published, and from what I could find, Madagascar had been in development for at least 4 years, with The Wild being said to have been in production several months earlier, and whether or not this is true, it does show how unfortunate the situation must have been for the people working on the project, with the rip-off allegations only surfacing after DreamWorks managed to get theirs out on time, while the studios behind The Wild took significantly longer to finish and release the film, forever tainting any discussion towards the film by having the clone label essentially stuck to it. With that being said though, Madagascar is still much better in every way imaginable. That's just how it is.
Sorry about that, everybody. Sorry. Hello. Do carry on.